Hey there, this is Jason Barber with Holistic Planning coming to you today to talk about the million-dollar question, which is, do I have enough money to retire? So this is a question that we get all the time from people that show up, oftentimes new clients that come in the door and they say, hey, I've been working and I've saved this money and I just want to know if I have enough money to retire. And it's a very challenging thing. It's a very scary conversation to have because there's more to it than just money. There's a emotional and psychological effect that comes with retiring and stopping an income coming in, from a job. And so a lot of it has to do with where they are from that standpoint. But when it comes to the money side of things, the nice thing about this is that it really is a pretty simple thing to answer for the most part. I mean, there's a lot of variables that are hard to know the answer to when this. We don't know, for example, one of the biggest question marks is what we call the sequence of return risk. We don't know for sure what the stock market's going to do tomorrow. We know long term what we can reasonably expect would be a reasonable rate of return on the stock market. Probably historically has returned close to 10.5%. I oftentimes will tell people to set your expectations a little bit lower, but the issue is even if you set your expectations at 7 or 8%, we don't know, for example, if maybe over the next decade, you might have 5 bad years in a row, and then we might have 5 good years. And that could still end up averaging 7 or 8 or maybe even 10%, but the order that those returns come in can have a really big impact on your overall plan. So there's things like that of course, there's software solutions that can give us a good idea of, how that might impact you. But generally speaking, as there's a lot of different, maybe what you would call rule of thumbs of, do I have enough money to retire on? And so I'll go over a couple of those really quickly for you. So a lot of times, people will say, well, if you look at the textbook answer would be to say, look at the 4% rule, where we kind of look at it and we say, well, whatever your assets are that you have, if you withdraw 4% of that per year, there's a really pretty reasonable chance, based on a lot of historical data, that you're unlikely to run out of money in that circumstance. Assuming that you're investing your money in a reasonable portfolio, give it a long time, don't make any rash emotional decisions with your investments and things of that sort. 4% withdrawal. So, for example, that would be like saying if I have $1 million of investments in a portfolio, I could reasonably expect to withdraw $40,000 a year off of that portfolio. And so if I said, well, my $1 million is producing $40,000 of income, and maybe I've got a pension of some sort, maybe I've got some Social Security income or some real estate income, you can add all of those together, and then you could just simply ask yourself if that's enough money to fund the lifestyle that you want to have. And if so, then, hey, you've got enough money to retire. Of course, there's a lot of different other variables to take into consideration as far as your health and your well-being and your lifestyle and your longevity, your family history can all play an impact in whether or not it's a good idea to retire. I would tell you that my personal opinion on this and the way I guide people and advise people is that in my opinion, you should plan to retire as early as possible, or at least be able to retire as early as possible. And once you're in that place, then you're in a mode of financial independence and financial freedom. If you decide out of your own free will that you want to continue to work, then I think that's a personal choice that you can make. But I really strive and encourage people to be at a place financially where they can retire as soon as possible. And then that way, if they decide that they're ready emotionally and psychologically and financially they're ready, then they can go ahead and pull the trigger and take it at that type of approach. So some other variables that we can take into consideration here, of course, are, well, if I retire early, say you retire at 50 or 55, well, we need to make sure that you've got enough assets in non-qualified, non-IRA accounts to kind of bridge that gap between that, age 50 and age 59 and a half. There are what are called substantially equal distribution rule. 72T is the rule, what can allow you to take money out of a pre-tax account early, but it does come with some strings attached to it. And so that's something that we'll have to do a separate video on to kind of describe that. Another thing to take into consideration is that 401k plans allow you, if you retire and terminate employment, they allow you to take penalty-free withdrawals as early as age 55. So that's another thing to consider. But generally, the plan would be if we retire early, we'd really like to have money in an after-tax account, like a living trust account or a single account, individual account, joint account, some kind of an after-tax account that we can draw money off of that money, live off of that while we're kind of in those early days before we've met the age 59 and a half magic age. Another thing to kind of consider here is that in those early days before we get to Social Security, let's say, I oftentimes will encourage people to implement kind of a bucket strategy with their overall investments. Bucket strategy might look at, for example, saying let's have some number of years of kind of some people might call it a war chest of money. So for example, we may have 3 years or 4 years of money if we're fortunate enough to be in a position to do this, where we may take absolutely no risk with that money. We may be saying we want to have 4 years of a war chest of money that we're buying CDs and treasuries and short-term bonds and any other kind of investment that we can generate yield with, but take very little stock market risk. And then we may have another bucket of money that is kind of a shorter term or intermediate term rather bucket where we take a moderate amount of risk, and then we may look at a longer term bucket that we invest a little bit more aggressively. So this is of course something that is very beneficial in the early years, because what that does is it significantly reduces that sequence of return risk that we were talking about. I think back to a particular client of mine that retired right when in the midst of the COVID crisis, when the stock market was going completely crazy. And we had implemented that bucket strategy, and it allowed him to be able to navigate that very smoothly, because we just drew money off of the safe war chest bucket of money rather than selling any stocks. And as you remember, as those stocks fluctuate in value, if we don't sell them, there are unrealized gains and unrealized losses until we actually sell them. So that's a really important thing to consider, especially if we're going to retire early. So there's a lot more that goes into this. Be sure to reach out if you'd like to start a conversation. Give us a call at 936-800-0800, or be sure to reach out on the website, holisticplanning.com, where you can set up a meeting, and we'd be more than happy to visit with you there.